Are you tired of spending too much of your hard-earned money at the supermarket? Are you dreaming of farm fresh eggs, homegrown veggies, and homemade everything? Well, welcome to Ditch the Store, where we break free from supermarket dependence and take back control of our food and household essentials. I'm CJ, and I'm here to show you that life is too short for store-bought eggs. So let's get started. G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ditch the Store. Firstly, before I get into this week's episode, apologies for no episode going out last week. For those that don't know, if you're a new listener, you won't know this. I fractured my leg very badly last November. And unfortunately, the leg was not healing the way that it should heal. I developed a bacterial infection because it was a farm accident. It happened in a stockyard with some cattle. And as a result, I had an infection in there. The infection impacted the bone. I ended up with osteomyelitis. And the bone wasn't healing. Essentially, the bone wasn't healing. And if the bone doesn't heal, the chances of me losing my leg are pretty high. So the doctors have to do what they have to do in order to get the bone to heal. I had a very large surgery a couple of weeks back now, and they removed all of the hardware in my leg. I had a rod in the femur that was there to help the femur repair. I'd also, a year before the accident, had a partial knee replacement. That had to be taken out because there was a concern about the bacteria being on the metalwork that was in my knee. And they did a big flush out, a big clean out. And in the end, they did something which we hadn't really discussed in detail before I went into surgery, but I did sign my life away and say, do whatever you need to do. I'm very attached to my leg and I'd like to keep it. And they ended up doing a bone graft using cadaver bone, which I think is so kind of cool that we can do these amazing things medically now. I was talking to somebody about it, and my injury that I suffered 100 years ago would have been a death sentence. So the fact that medically we are able to do these amazing things to help repair people, I'm so blessed to live in the country that I live in. It makes me so proud to be Australian, to be able to know that I can just go to a hospital. I haven't had to pay to have any of these repairs done. It's all covered by Medicare. It was an accident, therefore it comes under accident and emergency. And at this stage, fingers crossed, we will know on the 2nd of June, so in a couple of weeks' time, we'll know if the bone graft has taken. And if the bone graft has taken, then I am on my way to healing. And, that's the best outcome that we can get. It's been a very long 8 months. I think it's over 8 months now since I fractured my leg. And honestly, thank you to all the well wishers. I've had a lot of people reach out and wish me luck with the surgeries and hope that I get better soon. But I just can't wait to be off crutches and be able to do things again. There are so many things around the farm that have fallen off because of this accident. We're going to have no baby goats next year because I wasn't able to do AI because of the surgeries and the leg not healing. The beekeeping, my bees, I haven't been able to do a varroa check now for a couple of months, which is killing me. We were lucky there wasn't anything last time, but I still need to keep on top of that, and I still need to check them, and we weren't able to do that. I wasn't able to expand or clean out any of the hives. Chickens. And my chickens are all off the lay at the moment, and there's no point getting baby chickens until I know what's happening with my leg. So fingers crossed, 2nd of June, I will know, and there will be hopefully good news that the bone graft has taken and that I am well and truly on the mend, and looking forward to a normal life again without all the hospital trips, because I'm a bit over hospitals, to be honest. Anyway, that's the update, and that's the reason why there was no blog or podcast last week, and I apologise profusely for that. There's only ever been one other time that I've missed my podcast. I do it every week. And the only other time last time I was in hospital as well, and it was Christmas Day. That's why I didn't put a podcast out, because I hadn't recorded in advance. Anyway, this week's episode. we're coming into winter here in the Southern Hemisphere. So this week I want to talk, and it's episode 164, backyard greenhouses. Now, when I say backyard greenhouses, I don't necessarily mean your standard, bog standard greenhouse that you buy from Bunnings in a kit and put up in your backyard. There is lots of other things and lots of other ways of making a greenhouse environment, or there's a difference to me between a hothouse and a greenhouse. A greenhouse doesn't have any extra heat added to it. A hothouse is something that you can add extra heat to. And believe me, I want both. The poor old handy helper has a list of things that he has to build one day. And one day I will have a hothouse because I want to grow avocados, banana, turmeric, ginger, all the things that don't grow in the Southern Tablelands, but I could grow if I had a hothouse. Fingers crossed. Maybe even some flowers that don't grow here. It would be awesome. Anyway, attached to the show notes, I will put a picture, a diagram that I've got that I use that shows you the zone, the cold zone. You can get hot zones and cold zones, but this is a Australian map of the cold zones. So you can work out what zone you're in, and that will help you decide what you can grow, what you can't grow. And we in the Southern Tablelands are in an 8, which is just about the coldest you can get. 7's the only colder one, and Australia only has a few very small patches of 7, and 7 is the alpine areas. So we're in the snow line. We're not in the snow line. We do get snow once in a blue moon. We'll get snow here, but not very often. But we are an 8, which means that the absolute minimum temperatures that they say that we get here are -12. Now, I have experienced more than -12 here, but it is rare. So -10, -7, -7 to me feels like the average winter temp overnight in the Southern Tablelands. Zone 7 is -16 is the average. Oh, that'd hurt. And for all you lucky ducks that live, up Queensland and places like that, you're probably sitting in about an 11 or a 10. I think even Sydney's like a 10. Which means if you get -1 in the 10 zone, that's an average, and 4 degrees, and this is Celsius, obviously, not Fahrenheit. In Sydney areas, in Queensland areas, 4 degrees is the average. Now, of course, there are some inland areas that are a little bit colder. There are inland areas like near Armidale. There's areas that fall into the 8 zone, and that's because of the altitude being so high that they do get frost, and it snows. Armidale gets snow. A gentleman that follows me that I know that I went through school with, I've seen pictures of his farm that he has up near Armidale, and it snows in winter sometimes. So yeah, they get it cold just like us. Doesn't have to be southern to be cold. Anyway, so where we are, we get frosts, okay? And if you don't get frosts, you probably don't need a greenhouse as much. But if you live anywhere where it gets below minus, which is probably half of Australia, you might want to consider getting a greenhouse or something like that. Now, we've already talked about in this kind of last month, composting and what you can grow, what you can start at the beginning of winter, your garden jobs, your autumn cleanup and prep. That was episode 162, and preserving herbs, 163, which herbs are something you can definitely grow in a greenhouse through winter. Protecting them from frost is really important. There are some things that the frost just absolutely annihilates straight up. So the first thing you need to do is know your climate zone. Once you've had a look at that map and you've worked out what that is, you need to work out your frost dates. Now, for us, our frost dates, there's a bit of a joke in the Canberra kind of surrounds, Southern Tablelands area kind of rather, where we don't put the fire on before Anzac Day. Anzac Day is like the point of no return where things start getting cold. And Anzac Day is actually a pretty good marker for when we start getting frosts. We've just had our first couple of frosts through May. We don't have them every day, and it depends on there's lots of things that frosts are dependent on. But we have had a few frosts. We've had a few times where we've gone out to the car and we've had to start the car in advance because the windscreen is all frosted up before you get in it. But you also need to know what your wind exposure is to the area that you're having things in. Foggy mornings, you'll notice that you'll see where there's areas where the cold air will sit because the fog will sit. Particularly if you're on a bigger property, you'll notice little valleys will have fog sitting in it, and they're usually cold pockets that sit in valleys. Now, whatever works for us here in the Southern Tablelands may not apply to coastal Queensland, say for example. But that's where you need to sit down and work out what your frost date is. So when your first frost is likely, and then try and work out when at what point your frosts are going to end. For us, it's usually August would be our last frost, but we will always get one of those random one-off frosts in September that you're not expecting, and all of a sudden everything's frozen. And it's not just plants that suffer. You've got to take into account your animals as well. We have water troughs that are out in the paddock with our animals, and those water troughs can freeze over. Now, in some of our paddocks, we have dams which don't freeze over, obviously, because we're not that cold. We're not in a snow environment, but we do have to go and chip the ice away at water troughs if we want our animals to be able to drink out of those water troughs. At the moment, we've only got one paddock that's only reliant on a water trough, so that's the only one we really have to worry about. The other paddocks where the bigger animals are, they've got dams, so we don't have to worry about those freezing over. Now, you don't have to go fancy either, and I actually don't have a greenhouse at the moment in the true sense of the word greenhouse. What I have is a shade cloth house, and I was very, very lucky. I was surfing Facebook one afternoon, and somebody posted and said, I have a greenhouse, shade cloth house that I am trying to get rid of. I don't want to have to take it down. If somebody wants it, they can have it for free. They just have to come and move it. So I quickly responded and said, sold, coming this afternoon, is that okay? And then went out and said to the handy helper, grab your tools, let's go. Grab the horse float. We're going to pick up a shade cloth house. Anyway, we picked it up and we got it rebuilt. We pulled it all down in pieces. The handy helper rebuilt it here. It currently sits up in my veggie garden area. It is not a greenhouse in that it is not solid glass or polyurethane or any of those kind of solid walls. It is just shade cloth all the way around. However, I am looking at maybe blocking off one end just to stop wind and things like that, so that then it will be more like a greenhouse. But the shade cloth works very well. It stops frost landing on plants. It keeps the ambient temperature in the shade cloth house at a much better even rate rather than that big fluctuations. And we got it for free. We just had to dismantle it and then rebuild it. It's not a true greenhouse, but it's still very useful. But what is a greenhouse really? So it's not rocket science, and it's not a hothouse. Like I said, a hothouse is something that has an external heat source that keeps the temperature at a particular range. And I really want one. I saw one, I think it might have been on Pinterest. I saw one where they had like a little wood-fired brick stove in the middle of the greenhouse, and you could just light the stove and keep the stove on a slow burn to keep the ambient temperature in the greenhouse hot, which would be amazing. A lot of work, but depending on what you're trying to grow, it might be really, really useful. But a greenhouse basically is something that has wind management. So it has solid walls so that the wind can't come through, the cold winds can't come through to damage plants. Frost protection to stop ice forming on the plants, because a lot of plants, as soon as they get ice on them, that burns their leaves and they're dead. Moisture control. So, and this one can be a bit tricky because a good greenhouse will have ventilation. You want to keep things alive and moist. There you go. There's that word that there's always somebody out there that hates it. And I love saying it because I know it's going to irritate somebody. You want the moisture control, but not you don't want it so moist that everything's rotting inside the greenhouse. So it's really important to kind of keep that balance where it's damp but not soggy. You don't want it overdone. So a lot of good greenhouses will have a ventilation system where you can just pop the roof and allow moisture to evaporate out through the roof. Temperature buffering. So what a good greenhouse does is it keeps the overall temperature in that area at a more moderate fluctuation, so that it's not doing the big jumps up of freezing cold and boiling hot, freezing cold. Instead, it will keep it at a more even keel so that the plants aren't having to deal with that huge jump in hot and cold. It essentially creates a microclimate, not tropical, but just more ambient temperature. Now, why does it matter? Why do you need a greenhouse? Well, it means that you can start plants earlier in spring. It means you can finish plants later into autumn. So particularly if you've got something that you know you want to keep growing, but it's not going to like frosts. If it's in a pot, you can move it into a greenhouse and keep it going, extend its life just for that little bit longer. You will get better seedling survival. Now, one of the things with seedlings is you can start them in a greenhouse, but then you might want to slowly acclimatise them before you put them out into a garden bed. It's something my mum used to do really well. She would basically open her greenhouse, and hers was just a greenhouse made from secondhand supplies. She would open it on certain days to allow the seedlings to get a little bit of a blast of cold, like a little bit more cold than what they were coping with in the greenhouse in the weeks leading up to planting them out, just to give them a little bit of hardening off, she used to call it, before she would put them in the ground. And it makes them survive better, they grow better. And it means that you can keep things ticking over in winter that you may not be able to normally keep ticking over in winter. One of the other things that is just, it's a bit of a softy thing, but there's nothing worse than gardening. I hate gardening in winter when it's really, really cold outside. When you're out there and your hands, doesn't matter what gloves you've got on, your hands are frozen and you're kneeling on rock hard icy ground. There's nothing worse than that. So having a greenhouse does mean you're going to be more inclined to go out and do some gardening stuff because the ambient temperature around you is going to be better. And so you will be more comfortable in a greenhouse than what you would be if you were just out in the paddock. So it's a little bit of a sooky thing, but it's certainly, it's up there with one of the pros. Now, your options. You can go as fancy as you like, or you can go as minimal as you like. There are so many variations in regards to a greenhouse. It doesn't have to be a stand-up walk-in, has a lockable door and an vent that you open with a little latch. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. There's lots of other methods. Even down to, I think I never pronounce it properly, but it's cloche. It's like a dome that you can just put over a plant. So you make like a little individual greenhouse for that plant. They're really cheap to buy. You can buy them off Amazon. Probably buy them off Temu, to be honest. Not that I'm advocating buying cheap Chinese shit, but but Bunnings would have them as well. Any Tractor Supply probably has them. And you literally just sit them over the plant and it makes like a mini greenhouse environment for the plant. The real thing to remember there is during the day, especially on a sunny day like today, it's a bit overcast, the sun's kind of peeping through. You would want to lift it occasionally to allow the plant to get some good air circulation. If it's on all the time, you're probably going to end up with some rot problems. There'll probably be too much moisture in there and not enough airflow for the plant. But starting at the smallest level, there's the cloches, or a cold frame, which is like a mini greenhouse. And that can simply be done by, if you have a raised bed with timber all around the edge of it, so a square raised bed, getting an old window from, the recycle, we call it the green shed here, the recycle places where they have, supplies, building supplies and things like that, they sell secondhand. Get a timber framed window, put a handle on it, and you can even put some little struts on the side to hold it up, so when you want to open it for airflow, you can. and just have a window that sits over the top of your garden bed. Now, if you've got a tall plant growing in there or something that's going to grow taller, you might need to have slightly higher sides on it. You might need to have struts that can open right up. But the idea is that it stops the frost landing on the plant and it keeps the ambient temperature within underneath it at a much more reasonable rate without the fluctuations. It is great for seedlings, not so great for taller plants. Like I said, you have to extend it if you're going to do that, but great for seedlings, great for starting things off, great for hardening seedlings before you put them out. So you could have it on, you can have like a table with a glass lid on it where you put your trays of seedlings to get them started, and then you can also, open it up to harden them off on certain days before they go in the ground. So that's a good little effective one, and it's a great one if you don't have a huge amount of space. The next one, excuse me, is a plastic tunnel or hoop house. Now, I wanted to get one of these, and they can be a bit expensive. I think if you hunt around, you can probably get cheaper ones, but you could be looking upwards of a couple of $100 depending on how big you want it. And obviously we've got so much space here, there's no point in having a tiny little one. But you can get small ones that just go just over your garden bed, and that allows a lot more height, so that's better for plants that are growing up taller. And it essentially will just be plastic tubing that sits over the top of the garden in a hoop fashion, and then it has plastic polypipe cover over the top of it. Stops the frost, keeps the temperature at a much better kind of level. And like I say, it is good for plants that grow up a bit taller, like not your seedlings, but something that's a bit more established. Now, it will need anchoring though. The wind can pick it up and lift it. So you will need to attach it to something and keep it fixed so that it doesn't blow away. The next one is the shade cloth house, which is what we have. So it's the size of a greenhouse, and I'll put a photo on social media so you can have a look at it. It's the size of a greenhouse, but it doesn't have the solid walls. So it has some wind protection, because wind obviously isn't going to travel through shade cloth in the same way that it would if there was no shade cloth there, but it doesn't stop the wind. It doesn't keep the temperature at a very even temperature, because if the temperature outside is cold, it's cold inside the shade cloth house, but it does stop frost getting on things, and it does slow the wind down as it goes through. So it's not a true greenhouse in the sense that it's plastic or glass on the outside, but it can definitely reduce frost damage and wind stress. And it's probably better for keeping things alive rather than growing tomatoes in a frost environment. It will keep plants at a much more even level and allow for less frost damage. So things that are in pots that you can move in there so that you don't want frost damage, that would be a great thing to do. And we love it because we got it for free. So being tight ass that I am, of course I love it when it's free. Now, polycarbonate kit greenhouse, which are the kind that you can buy from Bunnings, you can buy online. There's so many different varieties, and they can be expensive. Like, I think at the Murray Bateman field days, I saw some that were like $5,000 and $6,000 for a greenhouse. But it came with shelves. It's got a lockable door. It's got vents in the roof. Some of them had sliders where you can slide the roof open to really allow for that, airflow to go through. They are long lasting. They're durable. The insulation is great. So the temperature inside, you could almost get it to the point where it's like a hothouse if it's out of the wind and very protected. And the polycarbonate is less fragile than glass, so you don't have that kind of fear of pot falling through the window and breaking glass and damaging it. They're probably the most common thing that people think of when they think of a greenhouse, because they seem to be all over the place. And there's always somebody selling them, and you see a lot of garden stores with them. Now, a glass house. Where I grew up in Sydney when I was young, before we moved to the farm, I lived in an area called Warriewood in Sydney, which is in Northern Beaches area. And we were surrounded by glass houses. It was an area of a high immigration from Italy, Yugoslavia, Greek, like it was Mediterraneans. Immigrants had moved into that area and they had established themselves very well, and they were all very industrious. So their glass houses that they built were huge, and they were just sheets of glass. I can't even remember how they attached them together, but I just remember them being just rows and rows and rows of glass houses. And they grew tomatoes, cucumbers, I'm trying to think what else. I don't think they grew zucchinis. It might have been capsicums. They grew, there were staples that they grew. It was a big tomato area. We never ever wanted for store-bought tomatoes because you would just go and buy them off the people growing them. And these glass houses were so effective. Like once they were built, they had irrigation systems in them. I don't know how they worked on the ventilation thing back then, because I don't think they would have had like a sliding one, but maybe they had certain glass sheets that they could take out to allow for cross flow of ventilation sometimes. They are beautiful to look at. They're expensive because they're glass. It's going to be dearer. And of course, there is the issue of them being breakable. They do need good ventilation. And like I say, I can't remember as a kid how they ventilated them. I think they might have had every certain number of glass panes, there might have been like a vent pane, which was like the kind of vents that you have in a bathroom, where it's a metal thing that clips on the wall, and it's got mesh on one side of it, and it allows for airflow in and out of the bathroom. I think they had those in there, but they worked very, very effectively. And they certainly, in Sydney, where I lived, tomatoes and cucumbers seem to grow year round. So having the greenhouses obviously was serving that purpose. Now, the other alternative you have is to DIY it. And I love a good DIY. So if you have access to a green shed like I do, somewhere that sells secondhand windows and doors and things like that, windows and doors all joined together would make a great greenhouse. And honestly, I think it would look really cool. I've seen it done, if you go to Pinterest and look up, DIY greenhouse, you'll see them. They look gorgeous. They could probably be a bit fiddly as far as getting them kind of all attached. But I think if you just build a frame, and then like if you had an internal frame and then attached windows and doors, depending on what sizes you had to it, certainly you could have it so that the windows open still. And if you have windows that are still opened, then that would be great for cross ventilation. So it'd probably be a little bit of work involved, and the handy helper will probably shoot me down because I'm going to say I would love to build one of those, and I will one day. But as far as the cost goes, it's going to be a lot cheaper than buying a polycarbonate kit greenhouse or a glass house. And I think it would look really cool. If you've got the space for it, definitely that would be my option. Now, remember, when you are looking to do a greenhouse or any kind of greenhouse stuff, what you have to remember is that it's not all about the greenhouse. I mean, aesthetically, you might want a particular greenhouse in your backyard. You might want it to look a certain way. But what you're trying to do is extend your growing season, make it more comfortable for you to keep growing through winter, and make you able to get your seedlings up and running before spring, so that they're ready to go as soon as that last frost hits. You can buy the nice one. I'm not saying don't buy the nice one. That sounds terrible. It sounds like I'm saying don't buy the nice one, buy the cheap, nasty one. No, buy whatever one you can afford. But just remember that it's not all about the aesthetics. It's about what it does. And if it doesn't function properly, then it's really not much good to you. That's probably what I was trying to say. I'm a bit out of it still at the moment, folks. I'm still a lot of pain and a lot of painkillers and things like that. Anyway, location. This is something that sometimes people get wrong when it comes to greenhouses and outbuildings. Winter sun matters. In the southern hemisphere, we want everything north facing. South facing means that it would be in shade and not get direct sun. In winter, our sun drops down where we are in the Southern Tablelands. It drops down quite low. And so we don't get as many daylight hours as what we would like to. I would love to be up in, closer to the equator and have more even daylight hours. Oh, excuse me. But what you want to do is have it north facing, having no shade on it during the day, so not obstructed by trees or buildings or anything like that. Ventilation, really important. I did say that before. Glass and poly houses can overheat even on a cold day if it's sunny. So if the sun is beating down on it, full sun, you need to be able to vent it. And it's not hard to vent. Like I say, if it was a DIY one, you'd just make sure one of the windows is still open. The kit, polycarbonate kit ones usually come with a vent opener in them. And the glass houses, like I say, I'm pretty sure they built in a ventilated window every so many windows. Shelter from the wind. Wind will strip out heat and it will dry everything out, which means you have to water more often, have to be more conscious of watering. So having it sheltered from the wind is going to be a benefit for you. Don't put it in an area, though, where it's going to stay damp. You don't want mouldy. You don't want it to be overly wet. You want it to be able to be moist while still being airflow coming through. Drainage. If you are going straight to ground with your greenhouse, like if it's going to be on the ground and you're not going to have shells or things in pots, then make sure, even if you're having shells and pots, make sure it's not built in a really boggy area in the yard. Because if it's in a boggy area in the yard in winter and you're walking through, you are going to be walking through mud all the time. And that's just not pleasant when you're trying to do things. A slight slope is fine if it's going to help you with some drainage, but you don't really want it built on the side of a hill either. You probably want it fairly level and not in a shady corner where it just doesn't ever get that chance to, not in a boggy corner where it doesn't get that chance to dry out. Now, access. This is the thing that I laugh about here because it's probably more of an issue for people on bigger properties than it is for people who are doing all this in their backyard. One of the key rules of permaculture is putting things in zones that are close to your home situation if you're using them more often. So the more you use something, the more frequently you visit it, you want it closer to the house because you're not going to walk a kilometre down the paddock in the middle of winter and it's pissing down rain and pitch black and freezing cold. So your greenhouse, if you're on a larger property, should be somewhere that's readily accessible to you and you would be inclined to walk out and go into it and look in it and do things in it, even in the cold, wet, windy conditions of winter. There's no point having it so far away that you just don't touch it. I won't be trekking out to the paddock in the cold and wet. I literally drive the car down the paddock and do a goat head count from the car some days because I don't want to get out. Nobody wants to tromp around in the rain and the freezing cold. And I think I said before about the frost pocket. So if you have dips in your land, so just say you're on 5 acres and you have a little low-lying spot, that's probably not the spot to put the greenhouse. I have seen hothouses put in lower spots, and what they do is they dig down into the ground and use the geothermal properties of the soil because it's warmer underground to keep a hothouse going. So they kind of drop the level of it so that it's dug in, a bit like a sunken lounge in, the old 70s houses where we had sunken lounges. They drop it down and that keeps everything that's at that soil level, that bottom soil level, much, much warmer because underground is warmer than above ground. Size and layout. I don't know how much more I've got to go here. I didn't want this to be too long a one, but might be going a little bit. Size and layout. So what are you using it for is probably the best way to go. If it's only for seed raising, then a little glass window over a tray is probably going to be enough. Winter greens, you might want something bigger. Herbs in pots, probably want something a bit bigger. Seedlings, or if you've got citrus that you are trying to keep frost free, then a bigger polycarbonate or shade cloth house like what I have is probably better. You can also look at whether or not you want to store tools and things and pots and stuff like that in there. And that can be handy to keep it in there because then it's on hand and easy to grab. If you have a garden shed that you keep all that stuff in, great. the greenhouse should probably be near that, because that makes it easier again for you to get tools out, pots out, and bring them into the greenhouse. Now, practical things to think about. Walkway space needs to be where you can walk easily down a walkway, possibly carrying a bucket, a crate, a pot, pushing a wheelbarrow, not just you. So don't make the walkway so narrow that you can't get in there with anything, because there's going to be times that you need to carry mulch in, soil, compost in, new seedlings in. You might need to bring more pots in, and you need the room to be able to do that. Benches versus in ground, that's entirely up to what you're growing. Obviously, benches can't handle heavier, fully grown plants. So heavier, fully grown plants would need to go in the ground. But having some benches is very handy if you've got seedling trays or herbs or things like that that are a bit lighter, that you want up at kind of more waist level. Certainly since my leg has been broken, I have noticed that having things that are easily accessible can be a real bonus, and you're much more inclined to use them if you can easily reach them. So it's easier on your back to have things up on a bench. You can get better drainage, and you can probably protect them a little bit better from some of the pests that you will get that will come into a greenhouse anyway. So things like slugs and snails. In the ground, you're going to have a better chance of using the thermal mass of the soil, so keeping the root systems warmer in a greenhouse. So therefore less watering because there's less drainage, and bigger plants are going to do much better growing straight out of the ground in a greenhouse. Door width. Like I said, you might need to get the wheelbarrow in there. So is the door wide enough to wheel a wheelbarrow in? If it's not, do you have a little cart that you pull to carry things in? Because, if you're carrying soil bags or anything like that, compost bags, mulch bags, you're going to want to be able to get that in and out as well. So make sure the door is wide enough to get in and out with those things. If you're buying a pre-packaged one, if it's at a place like Bunnings or something like that, go and get a wheelbarrow and try and walk it through the door and see if it'll fit. If it won't fit, don't get it. Ventilation openings. Obviously, you have to have some form of ventilation. If you're buying a kit, make sure it has a ventilation system that works, that actually opens and isn't just some tiny little hole in the corner. If you're going to DIY it, get a screen, a aluminium window to add to your glass house that has a screen mesh on it still, and you can open it. Once it's in place, you can open it and allow really good airflow through. That's probably the best bet. Because even in winter, it can cook your seedlings, and you don't want that. That defeats the purpose of having it. So materials and builders basics kind of things. Timber is easy to use. Most people know what they're doing with it. They can do it relatively easy, and you can attach secondhand windows and doors to it. It can rot. So treated timber is probably going to be the way to go. And I know some people don't like using treated timber. Just have a look and see what kind of treatment the timber has on it. If it's super, super poisonous, then obviously you don't want that near your plants that you're growing to eat. But there are a lot of things that can be treated with. We used to treat timber with, I forget what it was. It was honestly, it was like diesel or something, which people go, oh, petroleum. Petroleum's in everything anyway. But we used to treat timber with like a lacquer paint kind of thing, but it was non-toxic, and it stops it rotting, stops the timber rotting. Steel is obviously very durable, but a bit more expensive, and you need to be a little bit more handy to be able to put that together, because if you're going to be welding things and stuff like that, you need to know what you're doing. PVC hoops, super, super cheap, easy to put up. Anybody could put them up. What you have to watch for those is over a period of time, they will become brittle. We had a PVC hoop over one of our fruit trees that was here on the property when we first arrived, and it's eventually snapped. The PVC has got so brittle that we went to move it, to change it around, to put shade cloth over the plant, and it snapped. So it's broken. So we'd have to get a new one. Cover options. Greenhouse plastic. Now, greenhouse plastic is just like, if you can think of those, like the cafe curtains that you see at Bunnings. So really thick, heavy duty plastic. It's relatively cheap, good heat capture. It will need replacing eventually. It doesn't last forever. It's plastic, so some people don't like using it because it's plastic. But it is very effective. Certainly stop the wind coming in, certainly stop the frost. Shade cloth, like I said, it's not like a true greenhouse. It will keep the frost off and it does reduce the wind, but it doesn't block the wind completely. The temperature will still fluctuate more than a real greenhouse, but it will fluctuate a lot less than nothing at all. Polycarbonate is very durable and has really good insulation properties. That's why it's a little bit more expensive, because it does the job very, very well. Glass lets in a beautiful amount of light. Polycarbonate, sometimes it can be a little bit dark in the polycarbonate ones. So glass, if it's not tinted or anything like that, will let in the best amount of light, but it's also the most fragile and it can be expensive to kind of sort out. The fixings and anchorings that you'll need. Clips, battens, screws, tape, that kind of thing. You need to anchor it properly. When we first put the shade cloth one down, even though the wind can get through the shade cloth, we had a really, really windy day and it actually picked the entire shade cloth house up in the wind because we hadn't anchored it enough. Believe me, the handy helper was out there anchoring it pretty quick when we saw it go up. It didn't move very far. It probably moved about 1 metre, but you need to be mindful of making sure that everything is anchored. You don't want to come home from work one day and find your greenhouse in somebody else's backyard. That would not be a very good day. So make sure that it is anchored down. Now you can get things like tent pegs. That's what the handy helper uses. He goes and buys a whole bunch of tent pegs from camping stores and peg things into the ground through holes in our one's poly pipe is the frame is made of, and it's got holes in it, and where it hasn't got holes in it, he's drilled holes in it and he's anchored it with the tent pegs. We also have tie down straps that we have attached to the fence next to it, just in case the anchors kind of fail, then the rope hopefully will keep it at least in the same vicinity. Ventilation, temperature control, like I said, if you are buying a kit one, make sure that it does have that option. But if you're DIYing it, having opening windows that have mesh in them to stop bugs and things getting in. The funny bit is you might want some bugs in there too. If bees can't get in to pollinate, then that kind of defeats the purpose to a degree. So having doors that you can prop open on sunny days, that's probably not a bad idea either, because that allows for the beneficial insects to get in there. There are some really fancy ones that have automatic vent openers where when it gets to a certain temperature inside the greenhouse, the vent automatically opens. That's a bit too fancy for me. And it wouldn't work for us because we're off grid and we'd have to run some kind of power source to it. I don't know whether they work on solar or whatever. Shade cloth. So if you have a polypipe situation as you're coming into spring, you can actually take the plastic off and put shade cloth over instead of the polypipe. And that can be used to shade plants that maybe are in full sun that don't need full sun, but it can also just help protect, like harden the plants up while protecting them from a direct frost. You can put a thermometer in there. Don't put it up near the roof, whatever you do. Put it down near the plants so that you know what the temperature is in there. Like you can go and check and see what the temperature is there. I think I'm nearly done. I'm going to go over. Watering and humidity. Greenhouses can dry out faster than what you expect because of the direct sun thing. So you need to make sure that you keep an eye on the water. And that's why it's handy. If it's close to you and easy to get to, you're more inclined to go in there. You're more inclined to check it. But you don't want it so damp that it's going to end up with fungus everywhere. You don't want the plants rotting because they're too wet. So water in the morning. If you have something that you can put on as timer at like 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning when it's probably at its point where it's going to be fairly warm. Water in the morning. If you water late at night, you'll end up just freezing the ground because the water, the moisture will be sitting on the soil and overnight it'll freeze, and that's not great. But make sure that you do have a good airflow on the days that you're watering. You want damp soil, dry leaves. If everything's kind of wet, then it's probably too much. Now, nearly done. What to grow in it? Brassicas, they grow in winter anyway, and they're good with winter. Lettuce, spinach, Asian greens, herbs, keeping them in pots is great, because then if it does get too cold for them, you can always bring them into a veranda area or somewhere where it's a bit warmer. Some things really don't like winter. Basil is something that I've never been able to keep going through winter here, but you might be able to stretch it in a greenhouse. You can start propagating and cuttings, get them going in a greenhouse, through winter. Some plants need to grow in that kind of dormant season. When you see bare-rooted plants that are always available in winter, those kinds of things need to get started at that time. Then we talked about the hardening off. You can transition seedlings before planting them out into the ground. You can kind of transition them outside so that they harden off, so that they don't all keel over at the first sign of any kind of cold weather. And I guess the main thing is that having a greenhouse just means that you can grow a little bit smarter and a little bit longer, which, I'm still a beginner gardener. I don't consider myself to be an expert gardener by any stretch. I'm good with my livestock gardening, growing, but gardening is something that I'm still learning, and certainly having a greenhouse has helped me keep things going for a bit longer. Now remember, you don't need, I'm winding up, guys, you don't need $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $6,000 greenhouse. You can start just with a small little cloche over a plant. You can start with a window framed box to start plants growing in it. You can look like I did on Marketplace and see if you can find somebody giving away a greenhouse that they may not use anymore, but they might say, well, you've got to come and pull it down to take it for free. They might be selling it really cheap, and you might have the money to buy it, and it might be a really nice one. Go and get it really cheap. But if all else fails, a cold frame box or a couple of poly pipe tubes with some plastic over the top to grow some things in your normal garden bed, or even just choose a spot that you can get shade cloth, and I've done this in the past, shade cloth with a bit of timber stapled to the end of it, and just kind of A-frame the shade cloth out over the garden bed just to stop the frost getting to it. Even that will work. Now, like I said at the beginning, I have been behind on all my blogs and podcasts and everything. Hopefully I'll be catching back up. So hopefully we'll be back to normal business. And we'll see how we go. Next week, I'm going to talk a bit more about frost protection and the basics and the kind of things that you need to look at because we are coming into that winter month. And if you want to keep growing, frost is going to be the one thing that's really going to stop you. And I envy all these people that live in Queensland and probably never get frosts. Down here, we get them pretty much from now. Every morning so far in the last week has been a frost on the windscreen. We get them from now right through until August. So for us, it's really, without frost protection, without knowing what to do, we're really stuffed. Anyway, that is it for me this week. Next week, we'll talk about frost, and hopefully the week after that, I will be able to tell you what the prognosis is for my leg. So fingers crossed for me. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye for now. Well, that's it for today's episode of Ditch the Store. If you're loving the journey to self-sufficiency, be sure to subscribe. You can also leave a review for us or share this episode with a friend who's ready to break up with their supermarket. If you've got questions or success stories, we'd love to hear about them on the socials. You can also find me at www.mojohomestead.net. Until next time, keep raising, growing and making. And remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.